Right now, as you're watching this, you're living in 3 dimensions. You can move forward and backward, left and right, up and down. But what if I told you that there might be 7 more dimensions hiding right under your nose? And what if you could actually jump into them? Would you survive? Would you even recognize reality anymore? But more importantly, what godlike powers would you gain at each level? Let's find out. What are dimensions? Alright, let's start simple. Imagine you're an ant living on a piece of paper. You can go forward, backward, left or right, that's it. You're stuck in 2 dimensions, a flat world. Now, imagine someone picks up that paper. Suddenly, there's an up and down you never knew existed. That's the 3rd dimension. Everyday examples. Think about your phone screen. It's basically 2D, right? But the phone itself, that's 3D. You can measure its length, width, and thickness, or picture a shadow on the ground. It's a 2D projection of a 3D object. Dimensions are just directions you can move in, or measurements you need to describe where something is. The basic breakdown: 0D, 0 dimension. The point of singularity, a point, literally nothing, no extension in any direction. It exists only as a location, like the exact center of a sphere or a dot on a map. Mathematically, it has position but no magnitude. The deep dive. In physics, singularities are 0-dimensional, like the center of a black hole where infinite density exists in 0 space. It's where our mathematics breaks down. A point is simultaneously everything and nothing. It contains location but no physical presence. Powers at 0D, none. You can't exist here. Existence requires extension. D, 1 dimension. The line of constraint, a line. You can only move in 1 direction, forward or backward. Imagine being a bead on a wire or a train on an infinite track. The deep dive. In 1 dimension, there's no around. If 2 1D creatures meet on a line, they can't pass each other. One must back up. It's a universe of absolute constraint. Edwin Abbott wrote about this in Flatland. Imagine living where you can only see a single point ahead of you and a single point behind. No peripheral vision because there's no peripheral. Real world 1D. Time in one sense is 1-dimensional. We can only move forward through it in our experience. Quantum tunneling happens along 1-dimensional probability pathways. Even sound waves traveling through a tube are essentially 1-dimensional. Powers at 1D. Movement only along a single axis. No ability to turn around without reversing direction. No concept of beside or above. (2D, 2 dimensions). The plane of flatness. A plane. Think of a drawing on paper, length and width, but absolutely 0 depth. Not very thin, actually mathematically 0 thickness. The deep dive. Edwin Abbott's Flatland imagined an entire society living in 2D. Creatures were shapes, triangles, squares, circles. Their houses were polygons. When they looked at each other, they only saw lines, the edge facing them. Imagine trying to perform surgery in 2D. You can't reach inside anything without cutting through its perimeter. The 2D paradox. Here's something wild. In true 2D, you couldn't have working biology. Your digestive system would split you in half. A tube going through you would divide your body into 2 separate pieces. Blood vessels couldn't cross without intersecting. Your heart couldn't pump blood through vessels that cross over each other. Real world 2D. Graphene is essentially 2D, 1 atom thick. Shadows are 2D projections. Computer screens create the illusion of 2D space. Some theoretical physicists even suggest our 3D universe might be a holographic projection of 2D information encoded on a distant surface, the holographic principle. Powers at 2D. Move in 2 perpendicular directions, X and Y axes. See only edges of objects. 1-dimensional visual field. No concept of above or inside. Can trap 3D objects by surrounding them, like drawing a circle around a dot. 3D, 3 dimensions, our reality, our world, length, width, and height. You, me, that chair you're sitting on. We can move forward, back, left, right, up, down. The deep dive. 3 dimensions allow for all the complexity we see. Organs can be inside bodies, rivers can flow under bridges, planets can orbit stars. The magic number 3 allows for stable orbits, knotted structures, and complex life. It's the minimum needed for real complexity. Why 3 dimensions is special? Physicist Max Tegmark showed that in 2D you can't have complex neural networks. Signals would have to cross, causing chaos. In 4D or higher spatial dimensions, atoms couldn't exist stably. Electrons wouldn't have stable orbits. Gravity follows an inverse square law because we're in 3D space. 3 dimensions is the Goldilocks zone for life. Powers at 3D, our current state. Movement in 3 perpendicular directions. Vision in 2 dimensions. Our retinas are 2D. We infer 3D through parallax and other cues. Ability to manipulate objects by approaching from any angle. Can contain internal structures, organs, mechanisms. Can tie knots and create interlocking structures. The 3D limitation, but we're trapped. We can't see inside closed containers. We can't reach into a sealed box without opening it. We can't look at all sides of an object simultaneously. We experience time as a one-way flow. These limitations would vanish in higher dimensions. The 4th dimension and beyond. Now here's where your brain starts to hurt. We've accepted 3 dimensions our whole lives, but physicists and mathematicians are pretty sure there are more, way more. The 4th dimension, time, the temporal dimension. Einstein blew everyone's minds in 1905 when he said time is actually the 4th dimension. We don't just live in space, we live in space-time. You can meet someone at a coffee shop, that's 3D coordinates, but if you don't show up at the right time 4D, you'll miss them. Storytime, Einstein's revelation. Picture Einstein riding a streetcar in Bern, Switzerland, 1905. He looked at the city's clock tower and imagined, what if this streetcar was moving at the speed of light? The clock would appear frozen. Time, he realized, isn't constant, it's relative. It bends and stretches depending on how fast you're moving. The deep mathematics. In Einstein's spacetime, time is woven together with the 3 spatial dimensions into a 4-dimensional fabric. The equation S2 bar x2 plus y2 plus z2 ct2 treats time as a 4th coordinate, but with a negative sign that makes it fundamentally different from spatial dimensions. This negative sign is why we experience time differently, why we can't move backward through it freely like we move through space. Time dilation, real powers. Astronauts on the International Space Station age slightly slower than us, about 0.007 seconds less per 6 months because they're moving at 17,500 mph. GPS satellites have to account for time dilation or they'd be off by miles. Near a black hole, time slows so dramatically that you could watch the entire future of the universe unfold while barely aging. Powers, when controlling the 4th dimension, time. See your entire timeline laid out like a road. Understand causality as a spatial structure. Potentially move backward or forward through your timeline. View all moments of an object's existence simultaneously from birth to decay. Predict outcomes by seeing probability pathways through time, interdimensional space, the 3. 5D realm, important concept. Before we jump to full 4D space, we need to talk about something mathematicians call fractional dimensions, or the spaces between dimensions. What are interdimensions? Fractional dimensions exist in nature more than you'd think. A crumpled piece of paper is more than 2D, but less than 3D. Mathematicians calculate it at about 2.5D. Coastlines are more than 1D, but less than 2D, around 1.3D depending on how jagged they are. These are called fractal dimensions. The transition zone. Imagine transitioning from 3D to 4D isn't instant. There'd be a between space where you partially exist in 3 dimensions and partially in 4. You'd be smeared across dimensional boundaries. Your hand might be fully 4D while your feet are still 3D. Powers in interdimensional space, phased partially through solid objects, exist in a superposition between dimensional states, access blind spots in reality where dimensions overlap imperfectly, potentially become invisible to 3D beings by rotating slightly into the 4th dimension, the horror of in-between. But being stuck between dimensions might be worse than being fully in either. You'd be torn between competing physical laws. Gravity might pull on parts of you differently. You could be conscious in one dimension but not the other. It would be like being half awake and half asleep forever. The moment you enter the fourth spatial dimension, your brain would essentially short circuit. Here's why: what you'd experience. Imagine suddenly being able to see inside everything simultaneously. In 4D space, you could look at a sphere and see every point inside it at once, like seeing every layer of an onion simultaneously, but from an angle that doesn't exist in 3D. The tesseract, a 4D cube. A cube has 6 faces, 12 edges, and 8 vertices. A tesseract 4D cube has 8 cubic faces, 24 square faces, 32 edges, and 16 vertices. When we draw a tesseract in 3D, it looks like a small cube inside a big cube with the corners connected, but that's just a shadow. The real tesseract exists in a direction we can't point to. Mathematical representation: just as a cube is defined by coordinates x, y, z, a tesseract uses x, y, z, w. That axis is perpendicular to all 3 of our dimensions simultaneously. Mathematically possible. Physically, we're not sure. What your senses would do: your eyes would receive visual information from angles that don't exist. Colors would appear that have no wavelength because they're coming from the W direction. Your brain, wired for 3D, would hallucinate trying to interpret 4D data. It would be like forcing a 2D program to render a 3D object. System crash. Your body in 4D. Your organs would be visible from directions that don't exist in 3D. Your intestines could be unraveled without cutting you open, just rotated through the 4th dimension. Your blood would flow in Klein bottle-like loops that are impossible in 3D. Your cells might literally unfold like flowers blooming. The mirror problem. Carl Sagan explained this beautifully.
What about the 4th dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself in equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in 3rd grade classrooms as 2 squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a 3-dimensional object in 2 dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The 3-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in 2 dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension. Now, let's take this 3-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a 4th physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those 3 directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a 4th physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
If a 4D being grabbed you and rotated you 180 degrees through the 4th dimension, you'd come back as your own mirror image. Your heart would switch sides. Left-handed people would become right-handed. Your DNA helix would spin the opposite direction. You'd be fundamentally reversed at the molecular level. Powers when fully in the 4th spatial dimension. Omniscient vision, see inside every object in 3D space without opening it. Impossible reach inside locked safes, sealed containers, or even people without cutting. Perfect escape any 3D prison by simply stepping in the W direction. Instant surgery, perform medical procedures without incisions, access tumors, organs, or injuries from the 4D direction. Unbeatable combat, strike opponents from directions they can't perceive or defend against. Matter manipulation, tie 3D knots that can't be untied in 3D space. Invisibility, rotate slightly out of 3D space to become invisible to 3D beings. X-ray everything, walls, clothes, skin, all transparent from the 4D perspective. The 4D creature analogy, if a 4D being visited our world, they'd seem magical. They could see every organ in your body. They could remove your appendix without surgery. They could escape any room by moving in a direction you can't perceive. They could see every card in a sealed deck. To us, they'd be indistinguishable from gods. Survival probability, maybe 30%. Your biology isn't designed for this. Your cells might literally unfold. Your neural pathways can't handle 4D sensory input. Interdimensional space, the 5D realm. Between the 4th and 5th dimensions lies something even stranger, a space where causality begins to fragment. The branching zone. In this interdimensional space, you'd start to perceive quantum superposition macroscopically. Schrödinger's cat wouldn't be alive or dead. You'd see both states simultaneously existing in nearby dimensional space. Every particle would exist as a smear of probability. Powers in 5D, glimpse alternate timeline branches without fully entering them, exist in quantum superposition, be in multiple places with decreasing probability, manipulate probability by partially collapsing wave functions, experience time as less linear, causality becomes negotiable. The 5th dimension, the branching multiverse. In the 5th dimension, according to string theory, you'd encounter all possible versions of reality that stem from your present moment. What you'd experience, every choice becomes visible as a branching path. Imagine standing at a crossroads, but instead of choosing one path, you can see down all paths simultaneously. You'd see the version of you who took that job, the you who didn't, the you who said yes to that date, the you who moved to another country. The many worlds interpretation, physicist Hugh Everett proposed this in 1957. Every quantum event causes the universe to split into multiple universes, each representing a different outcome. You measuring a particle's spin causes the universe to branch, one where it's up, one where it's down. Both are equally real. The mathematical structure. The 5th dimension would be perpendicular to the timeline. Imagine the 4th dimension, time, as a line. The 5th dimension would be all the parallel lines representing alternate timelines that could have emerged from each moment. It's not just about your choices. It's every quantum fluctuation, every particle interaction, every moment when the universe chooses one outcome over another. The overwhelming truth, physicist Brian Greene describes this as a space of possibilities. But here's the horror, you wouldn't just see these possibilities, you'd feel the pull of every unlived life. The grief of roads not taken would be physically tangible. Some versions of you are happy, some are suffering, some are dying, some never existed because your parents never met. Powers when fully in the 5th dimension. It's your timeline vision. See all possible outcomes of current events simultaneously. Quantum choice awareness. Understand which decisions create the most dramatic timeline branches. Probability reading. Calculate the likelihood of different futures. Parallel self-communication, potentially interact with alternate versions of yourself. Destiny mapping, see which timelines lead to which ultimate outcomes. Regret transcendence, understand that every choice you made was also not made in another timeline. Decision omniscience, make choices with full knowledge of all possible consequences. The psychological burden, you'd see every version of yourself. The you who became a doctor, the you who died in childhood, the you who won the lottery, the you who committed unspeakable acts, the you who achieved greatness, the you who gave up, all equally real, all equally you. A 5-dimensional being, a 5D being, could manipulate your timeline like you manipulate a 3D object. They could lift you out of one timeline and place you in another, the way you'd move a chess piece. To them, your entire life, all possible versions, would be visible and accessible. Survival probability, 10%. The psychological trauma alone would be catastrophic. You'd experience infinite grief, infinite joy, infinite regret all at once. Interdimensional space, the 5D realm. Between 5 and 6 dimensions, you'd encounter something terrifying, the space of probability collapse and expansion. The quantum foam. At this level, reality itself becomes malleable. You'd exist in a space where the boundary between possible and actual is blurred. Timelines would flicker in and out of reality around you. Powers in 5.5D begin to collapse timelines, making some branches more real than others, erase possibilities by observing them, create new branch points by interfering with quantum events, experience causality as a network rather than a tree. The sixth dimension, the timeline navigation space. The sixth dimension would let you navigate between those different timelines freely, but it gets darker. What you'd experience. If the fifth dimension shows you all timelines from your starting point, the sixth dimension lets you move between them. You could theoretically jump to any possible timeline that shares your current starting conditions, but you'd also see every possible end, every way you could die, every way the world could end, every disaster, every tragedy, every moment of suffering across infinite variations of reality. The cosmic map, imagine time 4D as a river. The fifth dimension shows you all the rivers that could exist. The sixth dimension is a space in which all those rivers flow, the landscape itself. You could navigate from one river to another, exploring different timeline networks. The initial conditions problem, here's where it gets mathematical. The sixth dimension doesn't just include timelines from our Big Bang, it includes timelines from slightly different initial conditions. What if the Big Bang was 0.00% hotter? What if one particle in the early universe zigged instead of zagged? Each variation creates an entirely different timeline network. The prisoner's paradox. Researcher Lisa Randall at Harvard suggests that accessing higher dimensions might feel like being imprisoned by choice. With infinite options visible, how do you choose? Analysis paralysis taken to a cosmic, existential extreme. You'd be drowning in causality, your physical form. At this point, your body wouldn't really be body anymore. You'd be more like a smear of probability across multiple realities, partially here, partially in 1,000 other timelines. Your consciousness might fragment across the versions, each experiencing a different reality. Powers when fully in the sixth dimension. Timeline travel, jump between different probable timelines. Fate manipulation, change which timeline you're in to avoid death or disaster. Retrocausality, make changes in one timeline that ripple back to affect the branching point. Timeline merging, potentially combine elements from different timelines. Destiny override, choose which version of events becomes your reality. Causal freedom, break free from single timeline causality. Ultimate foresight, see not just possible futures, but all possible histories leading to them. The six-dimensional being, a 6D being, would be incomprehensible to us. They could move through timelines like we walk through a city. They could observe all possible histories of the universe simultaneously. They could make you experience every possible death or grant you immortality by constantly moving you to timelines where you survive. They would be gods of probability itself. The dark side. But here's the nightmare. With access to all timelines, you'd also be responsible for choosing which ones to inhabit. Every timeline you abandon continues without you. Every version of your loved ones in the timelines you leave behind loses you. You become a timeline refugee. Your consciousness likely couldn't maintain coherence across so many parallel states, interdimensional space. The 5D realm here, even the initial conditions of the universe become variable. You're in the space between same universe, different timelines, and different universes entirely. The parameter space. Physical constants start to fluctuate. The speed of light might vary slightly. Planck's constant shifts. You exist in a foam of proto-universes that almost but don't quite solidify into full realities. Powers in 6.5D. Perceive how small changes in physics affect outcomes. Navigate between nearly identical universes. Experience reality as a fluid rather than a solid. Begin to manipulate physical constants within small local areas. The seventh dimension, the multiverse of initial conditions. Now we're entering truly alien territory. The seventh dimension would include not just all timelines from our Big Bang, but all possible timelines from all possible different beginnings of the universe. What you'd experience: imagine universes where gravity is slightly stronger, stars burn out faster, life never forms. Universes where electrons have different charges, chemistry doesn't work, atoms can't bond. Universes made entirely of antimatter. Universes that collapsed microseconds after forming. Universes where time flows backward from our perspective. The anthropic principle. The anthropic principle asks, why are the constants of our universe so perfectly tuned for life? The gravitational constant, the strong nuclear force, the mass of the electron. Change any of them by even a tiny fraction, and life becomes impossible. The seventh dimension would show you why, because infinite other universes exist where they are different, and those universes are dead. We exist in this one because it allows us to exist. It's selection bias on a cosmic scale. The cosmic horror. You'd realize that our universe, where the constants are just right for life, is a fluke among infinite dead universes. Physicist Martin Rees calculated that if you change the strength of gravity by even 1 part in 1040, life couldn't exist. You'd be floating in a sea of failed realities, each one a different permutation of how wrong physics can be. The landscape of possibilities. String theorist Leonard Susskind calls this the cosmic landscape, a vast space of possible universes, each with different physical laws. He estimates there might be 10,500 different possible universes. The seventh dimension would be your map to navigate them all. Your existence. You becomes a meaningless concept. Your atoms could exist in one universe, your consciousness in another, your memories scattered across realities where different laws of physics apply. Carbon-based life might be impossible in most of these universes, so you'd exist as what? Pure energy, information, mathematical structure? Powers when fully in the seventh dimension. Physics manipulation. Navigate to universes with different physical laws. Constant selection. Choose which version of physics you want to operate under. Universe design. Understand how initial conditions create different outcomes. Death transcendence. Survive conditions that would be lethal in our universe by shifting to one where they aren't. Matter transcendence. Exist beyond carbon-based life forms. Creation understanding. Comprehend how universes form from different Big Bang conditions. Fine-tuning control. Adjust cosmic constants to create custom realities. The seven-dimensional being. A being existing fully in the seventh dimension wouldn't just see different timelines, they'd see different physics. They could step from a universe where light speed is different to one where quantum mechanics works differently to one where extra forces exist. They would understand why our universe is the way it is because they'd see all the alternatives. The ultimate loneliness, but imagine the isolation. Most universes in the seventh dimension are sterile. No stars, no planets, no life. You'd be surrounded by infinite failed realities, most of them dark and empty. The universe we call home, so precious, so rare, would be one bright spark in an ocean of cosmic failures. Survival probability, 0%. There's no coherent you to survive. The concept of biological life breaks down. Interdimensional space, the 5D realm. Between 7 and 8, you enter the realm where not just physics, but the number of dimensions itself becomes variable. Dimensional fluidity. Some universes might have 2 spatial dimensions, some 5, some 20. You'd exist in a space that connects all possible dimensional configurations. Reality becomes a choose-your-own-adventure book where even the format of the book changes. Powers in 7.5D. Experience universes with different numbers of spatial dimensions. Navigate between 2D, 3D, 4D, and higher D universes. Understand how dimensionality affects possibility. exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks. The eighth dimension, all possible universes with all possible laws. The eighth dimension encompasses all possible histories of all possible universes with all possible physical laws. What you'd experience. This is where language breaks down. You'd exist in a state beyond time, beyond causality, beyond before and after. Every moment that ever happened or could happen in any universe would be equally now. The birth of stars, the death of galaxies, your childhood, your death, all simultaneous, all equally present. Physicist Mikio Kaku's description. Kaku describes this as the garden of parallel worlds. But it's not a garden you walk through, you'd be the garden. Every tree, every flower, every atom of soil, individuality dissolves, you become the space itself. The block universe concept. Einstein's relativity suggests time is an illusion, that all moments exist simultaneously in a block universe. The eighth dimension would be a super block universe containing all possible block universes, past, present, and future across all universes, all equally real, all equally accessible. The ultimate revelation, you'd understand that what we call time is just our consciousness moving through a static eternal structure. Past, present, and future all exist permanently. We just perceive them one moment at a time, like reading a book one word at a time, even though all the words always exist on the page. The mathematical reality. At this level, physics and mathematics become indistinguishable. The universe isn't described by math, it is math. Equations aren't models of reality, they are reality. You would exist as a mathematical structure having a mathematical experience. Powers when fully in the eighth dimension, omnipresence. Exist at all moments in all universes simultaneously. Temporal omniscience, law everything that has happened beyond or will happen specific in any universe. Physical laws. Reality selection, choose which universe and which moment to focus consciousness on. Eternal existence, death becomes meaningless when all moments exist eternally. Perfect understanding, comprehend the entire structure of possibility. Pagani, God mode vision, see reality as a timeless, unchanging mathematical object, the eight-dimensional perspective. From the eighth dimension, the entire history of every universe would look like a static sculpture. The Big Bang and the heat death of the universe would be like the bottom and top of a statue, both existing simultaneously. Every event in every universe would be a feature in this incomprehensibly vast structure. The philosophical earthquake. If you could see from the eighth dimension, you'd understand that free will might be an illusion created by our limited perception. Every choice you make already exists eternally in the structure. You're not creating the future, you're discovering it, like reading ahead in a book that's already complete. The loneliness of omniscience. But with complete knowledge comes the loss of surprise, of hope, of fear, of anticipation. Every joke you'll ever hear, you've already heard. Every person you'll ever love, you already love and have already lost. Existence becomes a museum you're trapped in, unable to experience anything for the first time. Survival probability, the question doesn't apply. Survival requires time, and time doesn't exist here as we know it. You would be eternal, which might be worse than death. Interdimensional space, the 8. 5D realm between 8 and 9, you reach the space where even logic itself becomes negotiable. The logical foam, Aristotelian logic, A or not A, breaks down. Contradictions can coexist. Something can be true and false simultaneously without being a superposition. The law of non-contradiction, one of the foundational principles of human thought, dissolves. Powers in 8.5D. Experience realities where logical contradictions are resolved differently. Understand systems that operate on alternative logics. Exist in states that violate the law of identity, being both A and not A. Navigate between different mathematical frameworks. The ninth dimension, the multiverse of mathematical structures. In the ninth dimension, even the laws of physics become variables. More than that, mathematics itself becomes variable. what you'd experience. Universes where pi equals 3, where 2 plus 2 are 5, where logic itself is different, where cause doesn't necessarily precede effect, where entropy could run backward, where the Pythagorean theorem doesn't hold, where mathematics as we understand it simply doesn't apply. Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis. MIT physicist Max Tegmark proposed that reality is mathematics. The ninth dimension would be the space of all possible mathematical structures, not universes described by math, but math itself being the universe. Some mathematical structures would support observers, most wouldn't. Beyond human comprehension, our brains evolved to understand 3 dimensions and Newtonian physics because that's what kept us alive on the African savannah. Trying to comprehend the 9th dimension would be like trying to teach calculus to a bacterium. The hardware isn't there. We'd need entirely different cognitive architecture, alternative mathematics. Imagine mathematical systems where numbers don't commute. 3 plus 5, 5 plus 3. Infinity has different sizes in different directions. Geometry works on alternative axioms. Parallel lines do meet. Probability doesn't sum to 1. Time is discrete instead of continuous. Negative numbers don't exist. Mathematical induction doesn't work. A humbling thought, mathematician Rudy Rucker suggests that asking what the 9th dimension looks like is the wrong question. It's like asking what the color blue tastes like or what the sound of Tuesday smells like. The question itself is based on 3D logical assumptions that don't apply. We're asking the wrong kind of question entirely. Powers when fully in the 9th dimension. Reasoning capabilities and adapt to complex problem-solving scenarios effectively. Mathematical creation. Exist in mathematical structures that don't describe our universe. Axiom freedom. Choose which mathematical axioms to follow. Computational transcendence. Solve problems that are computationally impossible in our universe. Abstract existence. Exist as pure mathematical structure. Paradox resolution. Make logical contradictions work. Meta-mathematical understanding. Comprehend why some mathematical structures support consciousness and others don't. The 9-dimensional being. A 9th dimensional being would be incomprehensible not just in form but in essence. They wouldn't just see different universes, they'd see different ways of being a universe. They would understand questions we can't even formulate. They would experience realities we literally cannot imagine because our imagination is constrained by our mathematics and logic. The horror of understanding. If you somehow retained human consciousness in the 9th dimension, you'd go mad. You'd understand truths that can't be expressed in human language because language itself is built on human logic. You'd know things that are true but unprovable, paradoxes that are both resolved and unresolved. Your mind would fragment trying to hold contradictions as simultaneous truths. Survival probability. Percent. The question is nonsensical. Survival, death, existence, non-existence. These are categories that don't apply. You would be beyond ontology itself. Interdimensional space. The 9. Inside D realm, between 9 and 10, you reach the ultimate boundary, the space between all possible mathematical structures and the structure that contains all structures, the recursive abyss. Here you'd encounter Gödel's incompleteness theorem made manifest, mathematical structures that reference themselves, that prove themselves unprovable, that exist outside their own existence. Russell's paradox as a physical space, the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. Powers in 9.5D. Circuit. Exist in self-referential loops, be both container and contained. Navigate recursive infinities. Experience Gödelian incompleteness as geography. The 10th dimension, the point of all possibilities. The 10th dimension, the end of the line, the ultimate reality, the alpha and omega, the beginning and end of everything. What it is. In M theory, the evolution of string theory, the 10th dimension, or 11th depending on the formulation, is the point of all possibilities. It contains every possible universe with every possible timeline, every possible law of physics, every possible mathematical structure, every possible configuration of reality. It is, quite literally, everything that can possibly exist, including everything that can't possibly exist but somehow does anyway. The singularity of existence. Paradoxically, the 10th dimension might be zero-dimensional, a single point that contains all points. Every universe, every timeline, every possibility collapse back into a singularity. The Big Bang and the final entropy death, the first thought and the last star, all compressed into one eternal, unchanging mathematical object. What you'd experience, nothing and everything, and neither and both. The concept of you experiencing anything is absurd here. There's no observer separate from the observed. You wouldn't see the 10th dimension, you'd be indistinguishable from it. You would be the 10th dimension, and the 10th dimension would be you, and there would be no difference between those statements because different would be meaningless. The God's eye view. If anything could see from the 10th dimension, it would see the entire history of every possible universe as a single static eternal object. The Big Bang and the heat death of the universe would be as simultaneous as the left and right pages of an open book. Every moment, every possibility, every contradiction, all resolved into one infinite, timeless, perfect structure. The philosophical earthquake. Some physicists like Max Tegmark at MIT suggest the 10th dimension is pure mathematics. That physical reality is mathematical structure, and the 10th dimension is where all possible mathematical structures exist. In other words, if you reach the 10th dimension, you discover that reality is, at its deepest level, made of numbers and equations. Powers when in the 10th dimension. This is where the concept of powers becomes meaningless. But let's try. Ultimate omniscience. Know everything that can be known, including things that cannot be known. Ultimate omnipotence. Create or destroy any universe, timeline, or reality. Ultimate omnipresence. Exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Perfect unity. Be one with everything that exists or could exist. Eternal existence. Exist beyond time, beyond causality, beyond change. Complete understanding. Comprehend the answer to every possible question. Reality authorship. Write the rules that govern all realities. Paradox mastery. Hold all contradictions as resolved truths. Self-determination. Define your own existence at the most fundamental level, but here's the catch. With infinite power comes the dissolution of self. You would have no desires because you already have everything. No goals because you've already achieved everything. No questions because you know everything. No change because you are eternal. You would be perfect, complete, and utterly devastatingly alone. You would be God, and God would be imprisoned in perfection. The 10-dimensional being, God? A being that fully existed in the 10th dimension wouldn't be a being at all. It would be existence itself. It wouldn't observe the multiverse. It would be the multiverse. Every particle, every thought, every moment would be equally itself. This might be what various religions call God, but it would be a God that is identical to creation, incapable of separate will or action. The ultimate return, and perhaps the greatest power of the 10th dimension, the ability to forget, to choose limitation, to become finite again, to experience uncertainty, surprise, growth, change. Maybe the 10th dimension chooses to experience itself through finite beings like us. Maybe we are the 10th dimension, looking at itself through infinitely many finite perspectives, choosing to forget our infinite nature so we can experience the joy of discovering it again. Survival probability, 0, undefined, meaningless. You would be beyond survival, beyond death, beyond the categories that make such questions meaningful. Let's say, hypothetically, you could somehow return from the 10th dimension back to our humble 3D world. What would you bring back? What would you have become? The unbearable knowledge. You'd carry the weight of knowing that every moment is eternal. Every suffering, every joy preserved forever in the structure of higher dimensions. That every choice you make creates a reality where you made a different choice. That our universe is one flower in an infinite garden of universes. That you personally exist in countless forms across infinite timelines, and that all of them are equally real, equally you, the powers you'd retain. Even back in 3D, you'd have residual abilities. Perfect intuition from having seen all possible outcomes, the ability to make optimal decisions by remembering which timelines led where, immunity to regret, knowing every choice was also not made, complete fearlessness, having experienced every possible death, infinite compassion, having been every possible person, ultimate detachment, having been everything and nothing. The story of the mathematician. There's an old story about the mathematician Kurt Gödel. He was Einstein's walking buddy at Princeton. Gödel proved that in any mathematical system complex enough to be interesting, there are true statements that can't be proven within that system. Some say he went mad with the implications that ultimate truth might be forever beyond our reach, that mathematics contains infinite unprovable truths, that reality itself might be fundamentally incomplete. Similarly, you might return from higher dimensions with knowledge that's true but impossible to prove or communicate. You'd know things you couldn't explain. You'd understand questions that can't be formulated in human language. You'd be a prophet with a message that can't be translated. What changed? You'd never look at reality the same way. That table in front of you? It's not solid, it's mostly empty space where probability waves collapse when observed. It exists in 3 dimensions we see and 7 we don't. It's connected to every other particle in the universe through quantum entanglement. It's eternal in the structure of space-time, existing at this moment forever in the 4th dimension. More than that, it exists in infinite variance across the 5th dimension. In some timelines, it's in a different room. In others, it was never built. In the 7th dimension, there are universes where the matter it's made of doesn't exist. In the 9th dimension, there are mathematical structures where table isn't even a coherent concept. The curse of perspective. But here's the dark side. You'd be functionally schizophrenic in 3D reality. Your memories would include experiences from multiple timelines. You'd mourn deaths that haven't happened yet. You'd celebrate victories from alternate paths. You'd be unable to take any 3D concern seriously because you've seen the cosmic scale of irrelevance. Your relationships would suffer. How do you love someone when you've seen infinite versions of them, some wonderful, some monstrous? How do you fear death when you know you exist eternally across dimensions? How do you care about your job when you've witnessed universes being born and dying? The integration, maybe eventually you'd learn to live with it. Maybe you'd find meaning in this timeline, this universe, this moment, precisely because you've seen all the others. Maybe limitation would become precious again. Maybe being finite would feel like freedom after infinity's prison. Why it matters. Look, we can't actually jump to the 10th dimension. Our bodies are 3D structures evolved over billions of years to navigate 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension. You can't just upgrade matter like you upgrade software. The energy required would be astronomical, possibly infinite. The real takeaway: understanding dimensions, even theoretically, changes how we see the world. It teaches humility. Our senses evolved to hunt, gather, and avoid predators on the African savanna. We weren't designed to understand the universe. The fact that we can even conceive of 10 dimensions using mathematics is extraordinary. We're 3D beings imagining 10D reality through pure abstract thought. That's miraculous. The powers we already have, but here's what's beautiful. We already have our own superpowers. We can imagine things that don't exist. We can understand mathematics that describe realities we can't perceive. We can feel compassion for people we've never met. We can change our behavior based on imagined futures. We can find meaning in a possibly meaningless universe. We can love each other despite knowing we'll die. These aren't 10D powers, but they're not bad for 3D beings. The ongoing quest. Scientists at CERN are smashing particles together at nearly light speed, looking for evidence of extra dimensions. They're checking if gravity leaks into other dimensions, which might explain why it's so weak compared to other forces. They're looking for Kaluza-Klein particles, evidence of compactified dimensions. Gravitational wave detectors are testing whether gravity propagates through extra dimensions. So far, nothing conclusive, but the search continues. The evidence, or lack thereof. The Large Hadron Collider has seen no evidence of extra dimensions up to energy scales of about 13 TeV. This puts limits on how large those extra dimensions could be if they exist. If extra dimensions exist, they're either very small, less than 10-19 meters, or interact very weakly with our matter. We're looking, but the universe is keeping its secrets. Final thought. Maybe we're like those ants on the garden hose, unaware of the vast complexity surrounding us. Maybe 10 dimensions is just the beginning. Some theories suggest 11 or 26 or infinite dimensions. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions entirely. Maybe dimensions aren't even the right framework. Or maybe And this is the truly humbling possibility. Maybe our universe really is just 3D plus time, and all these higher dimensions are beautiful mathematics that describe nothing real. Maybe we invented them to make our equations work, and reality is simpler than we think. We don't know yet. The invitation. But isn't it incredible that we can ask these questions at all, that we can imagine realities we can't perceive, that we can use mathematics to touch the infinite? We might be trapped in 3 dimensions, but our minds can soar through 10. Thanks for joining me on this journey through dimensions. If your brain hurts, you're welcome. If you had an existential crisis, that's normal. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me which dimension you'd visit if you could. Me? I'm staying right here in good old 3D. It's complicated enough, though I can't help wondering, what if we're already in the 10th dimension and we just chose to forget?